how to use SharePoint as an SAP software document management platform. We appreciate everyone joining today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second and introduce our speakers. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal. And I'm joined by our key speakers today, Product Manager Will Irwin, and we will also have our Director of Technical Solutions on for the Q&A, Nathan Hampson. Now, before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. We're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you will see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. All answers are anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Now, to kick things off, I have just a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimmal is an information governance software company that was founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration, file analysis, electronic and physical records management, document management for SAP. And for those who are not new to our webinars, there is a bit of a name change you might notice. They are the same products, but with a more simplified name for your convenience. But without further ado, I will hand it off to Will so he can get started with today's presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Shana, and thank you everybody for joining the webinar. Today's agenda, we're going to focus on the benefits of using SharePoint SAP software archiving, ensuring change management with a familiar interface, and how to improve access to document content related to SAP business transactions. But first, we have a quick poll question for the audience. Let's see here. What version of SAP ERP is your organization using? I wonder if we have some Jeopardy music we can play. Maybe not. So I'll wait for a few of those poll results to come in, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
Yep, well, they are coming in right now, and this really helps us gauge our conversation and kind of know our audience to customize the presentation for you guys. So, all right, looks like the results are in.
All right, thank you. So first, we'll take a look at the benefits of the Gimmal Link software when storing document content related to SAP business transactions in your Microsoft 365 environment. Now, it's standard functionality for SAP to allow for the ability to store document content so that it's accessible through the SAP user interface. The obvious benefits this gives the user is that documents are available where the user normally expects them to be. This gives the documents context. The document has meaning because it's linked to a business transaction. It also gives the document some security in that it's available to the same end user that has access to the business transaction within SAP. And it gives the user some efficiency in that it maintains the working flow for the user. They don't have to break out of what they're doing to go somewhere else to find the document related to the transaction. It's all right there for them. Although this is basic functionality for SAP, these documents are still getting stored somewhere, and if this isn't planned for accordingly, then could potentially have some greater or some unexpected costs associated with it. The document storage that contains these documents that are accessible from SAP should be managed in a document lifecycle from beginning to end. They should be available to other business processes outside of SAP so that they can be accessible for collaboration as well as cost efficient to store. And these are costs, but they are actually really key benefits for storing these documents in Microsoft SharePoint. So these are the three most common default options for storing SAP documents. The first being SAP database, which is where that document content will reside if there isn't any additional configuration done. However, using this option could vastly increase the size of the SAP database, which is problematic, especially as organizations look to move toward SAP HANA. And like most of you probably know, with SAP HANA, the SAP database is actually stored in memory, which is great for things like real-time analytics and data aggregation, but it doesn't really add any value to store document content. And in fact, because of the additional size of the database, the necessary memory to hold that database becomes a cost issue. Another typical place for storing documents related to SAP transactions is in SAP Content Server, which is a free reference implementation of the content server protocols that enable this functionality behind the scenes. It is available to SAP customers, but the issues with using it are, although it's inexpensive to implement and license, it still requires an IT infrastructure to run, and that IT infrastructure is fully focused on just providing that content to the SAP front end. It doesn't function as a true ECM solution for enterprise-wide access. There are also third-party solutions within proprietary ECM models. These are expensive in terms of licensing and total cost of ownership and do require specialized skill sets. And like we mentioned before, the migration to SAP HANA is a key issue when storing documents within the SAP database, and the ability to then access this content across the enterprise as needed for other business processes or just simply for non-SAP users to access. Then the expensive licenses, upgrades, and skill set for proprietary ECM solutions really are the costs of using those platforms for storing documents. And this leads us into the benefits of using Microsoft 365 for storing these documents. And whether it's preparing the SAP database for a HANA migration or getting out of an expensive proprietary ECM, there is clear cost benefit for storing this document content in M365. Because of the additional functionality in SharePoint related to things like Power Automate and Microsoft Teams, there are benefits for being able to automate certain document-centric processes outside of SAP, as well as being able to access that shared content effectively across the enterprise. Finally, there are tools for managing risk within SharePoint for maintaining that document content, such as access control, personal ID information, and as well as third-party solutions like Gimmal records for being able to retain and dispose documents with an appropriate lifecycle. So once your SAP document content is stored in SharePoint and linked back to SAP, then our Gimmal records solution can take over the document lifecycle process from there so that it's managed effectively. So we've covered the benefits of using this kind of solution and specifically why using SharePoint as the document repository gives you both the benefit of front-end access from SAP as well as enterprise-wide access and document management in Microsoft SharePoint. Next, we'll talk about ensuring change management really through the use of a familiar interface that end users are used to. and it's all about the end user experience. As mentioned before, Gimmal Link interfaces with SAP to remove the documents from SAP and store them in either an on-prem version of SharePoint or in SharePoint Online. And one of the really cool things is that nothing changes for the SAP users as we deliver the documents through the user interface, just like they were being pulled from SAP. And you get an added benefit by also being able to find those documents in SharePoint. So from the SAP user's perspective, it's still business as usual. They still use SAP and create and interact with content the exact same way that they're used to. And now SharePoint users gain visibility to this information by being able to see these documents that are now being stored in a document library in SharePoint directly from the SharePoint interface that they're used to working with. So no need to go back and forth between systems. It's really a win-win for both parties. And organizations can improve access to document content related to SAP business transactions by using Gimmal Link and Microsoft SharePoint. So from the high 30,000 foot view, we know the cost benefits and the primary use case of getting those documents out of SAP and stored into SharePoint, but we haven't really talked about how this is done. Now this next section could get a little confusing. It might be a bit detail overkill for webinar, but I do want to call out a few SAP services that Gimmal Link utilizes that I think are important to understand. One of the SAP services that Gimmal Link leverages is called Archive Link, which is an SAP service used for linking and retrieving archive documents. We can utilize and do support other SAP services as well, but today I'll only be speaking to Archive Link. Now Gimmal Link provides some document service modules that we call AutoIndex and ScanLink that really extend this functionality for archiving documents against these SAP business objects. These Gimmal Link services like AutoIndex and ScanLink, they sit on top of Archive Link, which allows you to call back into SAP to perform things like a remote function call or a business API. Now, I won't touch on everything that Gimmal Link utilizes, but I do think it's relevant to know a little bit more about AutoIndex. So AutoIndex, what is this? AutoIndex is what Gimmal Link uses that extracts metadata, the data about data from SAP for the business objects that the document is attached to, and it adds the metadata to the SharePoint fields, the SharePoint columns for the document. And it can also move documents to various SharePoint locations based on some metadata routing rules that can be configured. So the main takeaway here is this is the service that allows documents created in SAP to get moved into SharePoint along with all of its corresponding metadata. So for a more concrete example, let's pretend that I'm an SAP user working on a purchase order. So the business transaction is created in SAP, and I create a few documents. I attach a few documents to it. We can configure Gimmal Link, specifically the AutoIndex service, to look for key pieces of metadata such as a purchase order number. So AutoIndex will identify this new purchase order I created and move the attached documents into the proper area in SharePoint along with its metadata. There's also a related service called AutoIndex Update, which basically implements changes made on SAP objects to the SharePoint documents that are linked to them. So this means that if I change metadata on the SAP object, then it's automatically reflected on those linked documents in SharePoint. This essentially maintains a one-to-one metadata correlation between SAP and SharePoint. ScanLink is another Gimmal Link service that triggers certain SAP actions when a document is uploaded or created in SharePoint. And while there are several actions that are available, this is primarily used for linking documents to SAP business objects. So this means if I create a document in SharePoint, then it goes through a process where it gets linked back to the appropriate SAP business object based on whatever we configured. So for example, let's pretend that I'm now a SharePoint user who is uploading a new document related to a purchase order into SharePoint. So we can configure Gimmal link, specifically scan link, to look at the upload location of the document and look for a key piece of metadata, such as a purchase order number again. So scanlink sees that there is a corresponding matching purchase order transaction in SAP, and it will link the SharePoint documents to that business object. And we can do other things using scanlink, such as support for barcode linking for early archiving, things like linking to an SAP workflow and linking to a custom function. But this is really the primary use case. I think that brings us to our final poll question here.
Yeah, thanks. I'll go ahead and pop back in since I'm going to get started on the Q&A as well, Will.
Yeah.
But Will talked a little bit about the capabilities with Gimmal Link and integrating SAP software in SharePoint. He didn't show a demonstration today. If you'd like to see a demonstration, please just answer the poll question that you're seeing up on your screen, and then we'll go ahead and contact you to get you set up with the demonstration so you can see the software in action. And I'd also like to remind those, if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A. But with that being said, I think we're going to hear a little bit from Nathan as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the Q&A questions. So the first one we have is, which SAP business objects are supported in standard for auto index update?
Sure. So really any archive link enabled business object will also work for auto index and auto index update. The key configuration part of that is if there is a standard BAPI or a standard RFC, or optionally an SAP table that can be read to get the specific metadata that you want attached to that business object based on a lookup that can be derived from the linked archive link business object. So that's a very technical way of saying just about any business object within SAP. And the key part is having a specific link between that business object and the actual data that you want to store in the SharePoint properties.
Great. And does Gimmal Link support S4HANA?
It does. So our archive link and the document management system are functionally equivalent in S4HANA. And so Gimmal Link supports them directly out of the box. So whether you're on ECC, ECC for HANA, or S4 HANA, it's all supported.
Great. And the next one we have is, what about SharePoint 2019? How do you handle the 200 gigabyte per site collection limit?
So because of the routing enablement that we have on metadata, it is possible to route documents amongst multiple document libraries and sites so that you can architect your SharePoint basically to essentially scale infinitely. Obviously, really just based on the hardware that you have allocated. But yeah, so the routing really allows you to architect that in whatever way is necessary for SharePoint to expand it. Yep.
And the next one is, we are using OpenText today. How do you handle the migration to SharePoint?
Yeah, so we actually have a tool within Gimmal called Gimmal Migrate. That's specifically for OpenText to SharePoint migrations. And so it's fully audited extraction of content from OpenText and mapping and deployment to SharePoint. And as part of that, the key pieces of metadata used for SAP linking can be transferred over, mapped over, so that they're available for Gimmal link to retain the link so the document continues to be available from SAP.
Okay, the next one we have is, we are currently using Gimmal records for records management. How does Gimmal link work with that?
So because Gimmal link connects into SharePoint with the document then is available for Gimmal records management. So the life cycle and disposition of that document is now able to be handled by Gimmal records.
The next one is, can we use ScanLink for an SAP workflow, like an invoice approval workflow?
Yes, so ScanLink, in addition to being able to create an archive link, can be used for early archiving with barcodes. It can call RFCs, generally custom RFCs for a ScanLink application. And then you can also actually directly call a workflow from ScanLink.
And the next one in the chat we have is, what is the standard configuration effort for an SAP business object metadata update from your experience?
Yeah, so it's it obviously it depends on how complicated you want to take it. It's in that way it's a tool set, but sort of a standard configuration is relatively straightforward. So one example is purchase order, because there is an existing BAPI or business API for getting the detail of a purchase order. It's as simple as configuring that one RFC call for that BAPI to retrieve the PO information that you want based on that purchase order. Now, to do the update syncing, on the SAP side, you create a simple one-step workflow that basically says, when the PO object is updated, call this function. And it's a function that we provide on the SAP side that will essentially call out and trigger the metadata update for that business object, which then runs through the same process of retrieving the data from the BAPI. And in this case, it will update the metadata, the property information on the document in SharePoint, and then go on and process the routing rules based on that change of metadata.
And unless any other ones sneak in, I think this is the last one. Can you connect to multiple SharePoint site collections?
Yes. Yep. You can absolutely connect to multiple site collections. You can route documents as needed between sites and libraries. And technically, you can even do a hybrid approach. And we've seen this in certain cases between SharePoint on-premise and SharePoint online. So it's very flexible from that perspective.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up the Q&A. If anyone could think of any more questions, both Nathan and Will's email addresses are up on the screen. You can email them directly. You can also send us an email at info@gimmal.com. If you want to go to the next slide. Oh, next slide. There it is. Or visit us at www.gimmal.com. If you missed your opportunity to request a demo, you can also do that right there on our website, or email that email address. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar for those who are interested between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. So please check your email, your thank you email, if you would like the link to this recording. We also hope to see you at our next webinar next week, Creating Value, Understanding the ROI of Your Information Governance Project, where we will be hearing from our Gimmal CEO, Mark Johnson. So thank you for joining today's webinar, and we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you, Shanna.